Welcome to the Election University Podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now your hosts, Jason Bennett and Rainey Cohen.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
How's everyone doing today?
Great.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Election University Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
Thank you for joining us today. We're really pumped for today's podcast interview because we're going to be talking about how to do advertising without any budget.
That sounds impossible.
No, not impossible. We're going to learn from an expert today on how to do it and how to do it well, more importantly. I think one of the challenges for a lot of our listeners out there who are running for office for the first time is figuring out what sort of proportion you want to spend your budget on particular advertising. Does mail work? Should I do digital? Should I try to get on TV? All of those questions are probably swirling around in somebody's head who doesn't really have the budget to hire a consultant to kind of guide them through that process.
Right. Like, is my opponent's on TV? Does that mean I have to be on TV? How do I battle that? I'm particularly interested in how you use new media to kind of combat that. And I'm really excited to talk to John about it.
Exactly. Yeah. So our guest today is John Rowley. We're going deep into Tennessee. We're into the Nashville area today. And we're going to talk to John Rowley, who has been doing this work for a number of years. I think he's going on his 26th or 27th year of doing this work. Is the founder of CounterPoint Messaging, LLC. But for some of you folks who've been around for a while, you may know him from his earlier work at Fletcher Rowley, where he worked with several candidates across the country doing TV, radio, digital messaging. And now he's broken off and founded his own firm, CounterPoint Messaging. So we're going to talk to him a bit about that.
Well, the thing, of course, I find interesting about John is that he clearly got his start in radio and TV. And as a person who did radio for 15 years and made this jump into communications and politics, I'm super excited to talk to somebody who has done exactly that.
It's like kismet, right? These two worlds crossing. So we're going to jump right into the interview. John Rowley, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Jason.
Before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how it got to be that you got involved in politics?
Well, I mean, my father was a history civics teacher in Illinois, where I grew up, and so I mean, he probably planted the seeds. But part of the challenge was when I was kind of coming of age and thinking about a career, the guidance counselor kind of had a playbook if you were interested in government or politics, and they said you could teach. You could go to work for the government or you could go to law school. And it was kind of like strike 1, 2, and 3. So I didn't really even plan on any sort of a career around politics or government because I was, kind of misguided by the guidance counselor. They didn't even imagine the political consulting industry because it was probably 500 to 1,000 people at the time. And it's now probably, 5 to 10,000 people at least. And, So along the way, by the time I was 20, I'd worked in television. I had real full-time jobs in radio and a real full-time job in television before 20. And so I was kind of headed on that track. I'd been a reporter and a DJ and had a rock and roll show and I'd voiced commercials and all this stuff, just that I had no business doing, but I just kind of fell into an interesting job. And then so almost my last month of college, I kept asking people, I want to do something politically. And finally, this guy handed me a business card of somebody, and they said, this guy makes political ads for a living. He just worked against David Duke in the governor's race in Louisiana. And it was, and I'm like, that's a job? It was just like, you can make ads for a living. So there was a guy named Bill Fletcher, and I called this guy 12 times before he returned my call. And he eventually returned my call, and I kind of went and almost interned for him, and then I became a creative collaborator and then a business partner in his company and ran his company for a long time. And he and I ended up in business together for 24 plus years together. So that's my very inglamorous entry into politics. So,
how did you end up in Nashville?
to go work with him. I mean, I gradually migrated south over the years. So I went to college where my parents had met in the South, and then he was in Nashville. So that's how I landed here.
Gotcha. Very cool. So tell us a little bit about the work that your firm, CounterPoint Messaging, does for candidates.
Sure. I mean, we do messaging and strategy, and then just a lot of focus on the creative around digital ads, radio ads, TV ads, and video content, and then targeted media buying, whether we're buying TV, radio, or online ad space and whatnot. And we, in the last 4 or 5 years, only one of the last 4 or 5 years has been a really great year for Democrats and progressives, which is who we work for in partisan races. But we've won between 87 and 89% of our races in that period of time, and that's been from two of the most competitive, Republican-held governorships that flipped in the last few years in Alaska, which you're familiar with, Jason, and Louisiana, to the congressional work, in glamorous down ballot work, all over the board. So I think a couple of our signatures is just strong, clear messaging that connects emotionally with voters, whether it's through a speech or an ad or online content, however we're delivering it. And I think one of the great failings of the 3 presidential campaigns that Democrats, in my judgment, should have won and lost, Gore, Kerry, and Hillary Clinton, they were pretty big failures of emotionally connected messaging overall. And so that's something we just try to be very focused on. And and a lot of that is trying to get to the core of what are the strengths of a candidate, connect that with our opposition's weaknesses, and connect the third dot, which is what does this electorate really care about? So if you can connect our strength, their weakness with what this electorate cares about, then you can potentially have an ad, a message that really sings, resonates, and moves the needle with voters.
So let's talk about just video advertising in particular. Most folks who are listening should be familiar with video advertising, at least as consumer ads have been over the past few years. What is probably more unclear for folks is understanding its effectiveness, how to do it, and the cost that's associated with it. Why are we still putting so much of our campaign budgets into broadcast TV?
Right. Well, one reason is that it's still pretty effective. I do think the kind of the cautionary tale I would put out there for anybody thinking about advertising around politics or advertising in general is that there becomes a prevailing wisdom. Maybe this isn't one, but a few years ago, well, digital's a little overrated, or TV is all that matters, or it's all about field. And anybody who starts buying into that any one thing in a campaign is the everything is just crazy, if not idiotic. So the most effective way to move the needle, whether it's to promote a candidate and get a vote or to promote a movie and have a big opening weekend, is really multi-platform advertising, from paid ways to get the message out to word of mouth to different ways that people can read articles and read other content online and in print and whatnot. And so multiple touches from multiple sources is the real way to persuade humans to do something. So probably the most multifaceted communications campaign we did in the last year. We had text messaging. We delivered digital content to people's devices while voters were in line for a GOTV message. We had black radio. We had cable. We had mail. We had social media. We had all sorts of different targeted digital things, field, door knocking, every phase of the game. It was a mayor's race we did. But we also had network TV. We never really started our 15-point come from behind until we got on network TV. Now, every one of those, we won our first race by 70 votes and the second race by 3 points. So every phase of the game is the reason we won, but all of them together, the symphony is what them working together was really the key. So people who anybody saying TV's dead is just uninformed, and anybody saying TV alone is the thing isn't that informed either. I mean, if you wonder why some of these wealthy candidates who outspend somebody 4-1 lose, it's because they often want to run a TV campaign only, and they don't put in the other phases of the game. And I think the other thing, the reason that the TV ad or the video campaigning is just always going to be essential is you can't fight Mother Nature. I mean, it's just the human brain. We have visual memories, and so whether there's one day when DirecTV and Hulu and Netflix and the internet, whether that all gets into just one pipe that we're advertising through at some point, then it's still just going to be the power of telling a visual story. And I think that's maybe one of the most important skills a campaign practitioner or candidate needs to get real focused on is, what's our message and how are we going to tell this story visually in video or print or in online and in all the different phases of the game.
Yeah. So I have a question specifically about that. We've, touched on the importance of storytelling and connecting with, your constituents, and, it doesn't matter how much you spend on your advertising if you're not making a connection. And I'm wondering if, presuming that you're making that connection, do you see a big difference between video or still images? Because I'm just trying to think about, people who might be using Election University with no advertising budget might be inclined to use pictures instead of video. And I'm wondering what your experience or opinion is about that.
Well, I mean, to tell a really emotional story, it's probably, you probably need some video in there, but but I think, still photography can be powerful too. It's a different way to tell a visual story. So it's still kind of visual storytelling. So I think either one can be really powerful. And I think I do think, the core belief I have, and there aren't many real laws of physics of politics anymore in this day and age, but I think one of them is you just have to have a message on day one. I mean, before you start coming up with what's video or what's your story or things like that, you've got to have a message, even if it's not a perfect one yet. I mean, I really counsel people on day one, what's this campaign about, especially if you've got some clear ideas of one-on-one with an opponent and how you're maybe different and better. But even not, I mean, what are two or three things, and not a long treatise, but what are two or three things that this campaign's about, and kind of begin with two or three message points on day one. And so I think that's one of the keys to getting to some good video and other content is just getting real clear on what the campaign's about. And it'll evolve over time, but it's one reason that some of these right-wing candidates that just ought to seem unelectable still beat some good progressive candidates. They have an average message that they stick to versus the Democrats who often just they never get total message clarity. They want to be nuanced, and you can't boil the campaign down to two or three bullet points. And if you're really doing messaging right, it frees you up for a lot of creativity if you get your message down to two or 3 points. It's not a dumbing down. It's really kind of a smart focusing.
Would you say that if someone is looking to use ads on TV and ads on social media or someplace like Hulu, should they use two different tactics, like make two different videos, or can you make one video, like spend the money to make the one video that can roll out across all the platforms?
Yeah, it's it all depends on what it's going to cost you to make that content. I think the challenge every campaign has, short of a presidential race now, is there is almost infinite demand for video content, from FaceTime videos to saying something today about the government shutdown that may or may not happen, to something timely about healthcare. I mean, there's just so many different ways you can use video. Can you affordably get it shot or not? And so, I mean, there's definitely an argument for, with social media and Facebook videos and things like that, you can go a little longer form sometimes, and maybe they can, be a little bit more unplugged and less rehearsed and whatnot. But I think you've also got to have, probably some 15 or 30-second ads that you could put any and everywhere, whether it's TV or cable or buy pre-roll ads or sponsor or organically let them get out online. And there's just more and more campaigns. Just as much time and money as they have, they can probably produce videos. So I think the challenge is to continue to feed feed voters content that they want without overspending on video production, especially when it's maybe a time when just a small percentage of them, like this far from the election in 2018, are just not going to be engaged yet.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about like the small city council or, assembly, member who's running in a race that might not be able to afford a consultant, might have pretty limited means. I mean, you're not really advocating doing this stuff on the cheap and then putting it on broadcast or cable, right? You're talking a digital strategy for some of these maybe not as high quality production valued pieces.
Yeah,
right?
I think they've got to have a budget on day one that makes sure that they can kind of get their main persuasion and turnout message out later, and then they probably need a modest budget early on for a little bit of video content, which maybe it's as simple as some sort of introductory videos, and then along the way they're doing it themselves on their iPhone along the way. So and maybe sponsoring some things through social media and whatnot. But they probably still ought to spend any sort of like persuasion mass communications dollars in the last 60 days. So whatever they're going to do, they shouldn't overspend early on video.
Okay. So what would make a good video then for the internet, right? What would be a good video, low cost way for folks to communicate their message? Is it this is why I'm running video, talking straight to the camera? What would be your advice on what would make a good intro video?
Yeah, there've really been some amazing breakout videos this year where you've got the mustache guy in Wisconsin, and you've got the woman who the congressman is running against in Kentucky told her not to. She wasn't really the sort of person who ought to be in the military, and she wanted to go in the Air Force, and so. And when you've got a story like that, I think you want to figure out a way to get it out. There is, to me, it kind of goes back to the candidate and the message. They probably need to tell their own story, and you've probably just got to tap into all the resources you have to try to get the best quality you can at the most reasonable price. Because the challenge with making video is you think about the film industry and the movie industry, and you see the budgets of what it costs to make a film, and the bottom line with production is you can spend as much as you have. That's a good point. Do film and video now. But let me give you a couple keys of like do-it-yourself video, because really, even if it's a governor's race, at some point there's probably going to be somebody in the campaign headquarters shooting video at the gubernatorial candidate these days and presidential candidates. So I think every campaign somewhat is in the do-it-yourself business a little bit. And so here, I'll give you a few keys. I used to be real jealous and didn't want to lose control of this, but it's kind of way past that. And so one of the keys in do-it-yourself video, or if you're trying to do some sort of introductory video, to not screw those up is, and there's probably great YouTube tutorials as well, is the audio. I mean, when you don't professionally shoot things for a living, the quality, you don't have a very good perspective on how sensitive mics are and how distracting it is to not have good audio. And you're used to seeing professional ads and content and whatnot. So really be cognizant of getting it, having a mic, having somebody mic, having it quiet. If it's not kind of pretty perfectly, not have a lot of, to where there's not a lot of ambient background noise. I mean, that's very distracting. And even if you're kind of doing a down and dirty, authentic video, they can't hear you. It's just going to feel stupid. It's not going to feel cool and authentic. And and then the other thing is lighting too, and backdrops. I mean, people that are in a super darkly lit, super brightly lit, up against a wall in an office where it looks like Michael Scott. Yeah, it's where it's like, is this like a parody of Michael Scott in the Office TV series? Yeah. So, I mean, the basics of get good audio, find a good background, neutral background, or don't be like 1 inch or 2 from your background, and then try to get some decent lighting, even if it's natural and available light. Those are a couple of the real keys, and practice it a few times. And so
I would also just throw in there that using a tripod or some sort of anchor, if you're doing this with your cell phone, nothing drives me more bananas than watching like a Facebook Live video of someone just holding it and it's shaking and moving around like
Blair Witch.
Like Blair Witch.
Yeah.
It makes me sick.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. I mean, there are hundreds of people's nephews who make all kinds of great videos and edit things these days, but there's also hundreds of people's nephews that screw things up and you never see. So they never see the light of day. So it's a lot of taking away distractions. Really is a lot of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Do you recommend that folks have cue cards? Do they memorize what they're saying if they're talking to the video? Just stumble through it?
Not really.
Let it be more authentic?
If you don't have a teleprompter, you probably just need to riff. I mean, I think that the beauty of like an introductory video is that it can be very conversational, and it doesn't need to be perfect like a 30-second spot. And even sometimes 30-second spots, some of the more effective ads I've done, the candidate hasn't been pitch perfect. And so I think there's a strong argument to do something that's real kind of conversational and just have the candidate riff a little bit. And I think typically you'll be rewarded for that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about digital advertising. So you and did you go to the Poly Awards last year?
Will you remind our audience what the Poly Awards is? Yeah, the American Association of Political Consultants puts on an annual congratulations fest for ourselves. And it's where we listen to other experts in the field, the breakout sessions, and you hear from speakers that have done particularly well. And because of the 2016 election, last year's was rather congratulatory to the Trump administration and their organization. Right, yeah. And did you? Yeah, I was there. Yeah, I thought so. I was not there for the whole thing. It was in Southern California. Yeah. Did you hear the Brad Pascal, Trump's digital advisor, his talk session? Were you a part of that one? No, but I had heard about it. What were the high points, or what would you? Essentially, they react to? They put near 100% of their total media budget, everything that they were planning on doing, near 100% of it into digital only. And so ran very few broadcast or cable ads, if any. I think he said they did 0 broadcast and they did some mail in some areas, and 100%, near 100% was devoted to digital advertising. I mean, sorry to insert on this, but I feel like, did that have anything to do with all of the free flipping coverage that all the news networks were giving them anyway? They didn't have to advertise on on national television because it was happening for free for them anyway, which no candidate ever gets to experience.
Right. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, Brad Pascal worked at Apple or was a contractor with Apple, and so had done quite a bit of advertising from them, had contracted with them for some work, and then moved over to the Trump organization, I should say, at the time, to work with them on their social media and advertising as well. So he has a long background in this, and I think that was predominantly his focus of the campaign.
Okay.
But I was really more thinking about it in terms of allocation of funds and getting to your point, John, about everybody sort of chasing something after an election season. Now that seems to be where I'm hearing from candidates where they want to go. They want to spend a disproportionate amount of money on their digital advertising. And I don't mean disproportionate in terms of I have a value statement about I think that's too much money or not enough money, but disproportionate to what we've done historically. And that may be a good thing or a bad thing. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts on it are. And are you seeing tangible results from a shift like that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not sure I think you can, there are some things about the 2016 election that, you don't want to learn the wrong lessons. And I'm not sure I saw anything that Team Trump that wasn't Donald Trump did that was like some sort of tactical brilliance that ought to be, replicated and changes the way we do campaigning. So I think essentially to your point, they got $2 or $3 billion worth of free advertising, and Trump didn't raise the money to do other things. And so I think that it was a unique election in that I would agree that television ads were almost irrelevant in the presidential election, but I think that's going to be different in 2020. I mean, I think that was Hillary's messaging was ineffective. He didn't really have the money, but I think that'll be different. I mean, Obama spent $500 million in TV the last time he ran. So, I mean, we're not going from $500 million to zero, but obviously there's a migration happening of all the ways that 10 to 15 years ago that we would get a message out: TV, mail, phones, door knocking. All things are a little less effective. The problem is so that effectiveness, the viewership and effectiveness of TV, the readership, effectiveness of mail, it's not like we box that up and it's sitting in one place we can find it on the internet.
Right.
I mean, there wasn't a big Louisiana purchase of advertising effectiveness. Oh, we'll just go over here and here's where it is. It's all over. There's dozens of ways to buy and promote things online. And but no, I mean, there's definitely a trend to more digital. It's appropriate. I think there is no widespread agreement on what percentage of your budget needs to go there. There aren't really tried and tested guiding principles like there were on how much TV or mail and things make sense, because the lists vary of how well we can target voters. But definitely for your down ballot candidates, I mean, I think if you're in a low budget situation and it's a modest budget situation, and you've got to pick a dominant medium to get your message out, and still probably the two best dominant ways to get a message out is either TV or mail in a campaign. So if you pick mail, digital is probably a pretty good complement to that, to where you could almost have a list of the same sort of voters you're trying to mail, or the same demographic of people that you think are persuadable to your cause that you're targeting through social media and other ad buys. But digital's still a complement to other things. You haven't seen, if it was the magic elixir, you would have had people coming out of 2017 who had only than digital, and they've digitaled their way to heaven. It's just not. It's not. It's not where it is.
I have a question about this trend towards digital advertising, and this question is for either of you actually, because it just made me curious. Coming from the radio industry and watching kind of the decline in radio advertising and in TV advertising as people have shifted their resources to digital, I wonder if buying TV ads by 2020 actually becomes less expensive because they're trying to win back people who would advertise on their networks. Anything to that thought or theory? Or am I just totally off base?
No, it's not getting less expensive. So I would be surprised. I'd be very surprised if it gets much less expensive. That's certainly not been the trend up to this point. I mean, the only time TV got significantly less expensive was, around the economic downturn when just, some of the big advertisers didn't have money. But it surely will flatten off, but it hasn't gotten dramatically more affordable. And so what you look to do is you look to combine your impressions between TV and online, and hopefully you've got some of it is similar messaging and content. And now the one area, if you're in a situation where there's an independent expenditure going on in a campaign, the one thing to keep in mind is digital. There's a real advantage to putting digital on an independent expenditure, because when you buy television time, independent expenditures cost 10 to 20% more, whereas on digital there's no inflation just due to the rates. So there's sometimes an argument to have IEs handle digital versus candidates because they don't lose the buying power of their dollars.
Are you saying that TV
rates.
stations charge IEs more money to air a campaign ad?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Totally didn't know that.
Candidates get a different rate.
Interesting.
Candidates get an LUR, guaranteed lowest unit rate, but an independent group is treated just like a corporate advertiser, so they don't get the price break. Anyway.
Yeah. So speaking of cost, what are the factors that increase or decrease the cost of production and airing the ads? What are the factors that contribute to that and move it up or down? And what questions should candidates ask vendors about this process as they're shopping around?
Right. Well, there's kind of two phases of the production cost game. I mean, one is shooting, and then the second is editing. And so, I think if you have to extensively shoot something, and particularly if there's any travel or it takes very long. So there's kind of two pieces of getting a video done. So if you want to do something and it's just piecing together a few still images with a voiceover, that's going to be a lot cheaper because you may not need to shoot anything. And then a few tricks of the trade on if you're actually getting a little video crew together to shoot something and whatnot. I mean, the industry standard pretty well across the country is a video crews either work. They don't work hourly typically, unless you're getting like somebody that shoots weddings, and then they may not be your best bet for a campaign video. So, typically in the production industry, people either work a half day or a full day. So you can get 4 or 5 hours as a half day, 9 to 10 hours as a full day. And so, a lot of times you plan things around a half or full day. And so you get, 3 to 5 hours and you shoot as much as you can, or you get 9 or 10 and shoot as much as you can. And it doesn't really cost you any more to shoot the extra footage if you kind of have your crew or camera person. Now, obviously, if you've got your nephew or spouse or somebody who's your videographer, A, beware, but B, may not be as big of a factor. So,
we're going to wrap up here because I know you're super busy and you're also suffering from the death flu right now. And so really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us and give us your expertise on what would make a good video for those folks who can't afford a full budget. So tell us a little bit about some of the campaigns that you're working on, maybe some campaigns where, what you had talked about earlier, those 3 sweet spots sort of aligning right, what the candidate's strengths are, what the opponent's weaknesses are, and what the voters care about. Do you have some of those races that you're particularly excited about sharing in a visual in your media?
Well, a couple. I'm working in a few that are 2 of the top 10 potentials for Democrats to pick up congressional seats. One's in Michigan. It's a guy who's Sanjay Gupta's brother, a guy named Sunil Gupta, who's kind of a technology entrepreneur, worked at Groupon, has done some interesting things, kind of a unique profile of a candidate. And then Pennsylvania 15, I've got somebody who's a district attorney in a pretty competitive +8 Trump sort of district, but those have both been ranked 2 of the top pickup opportunities. And what gets me excited is just, the right candidate in the right district, or somebody who's very unique. And so, I've worked for hundreds and hundreds of candidates in about every market, but I still, every campaign's still different. The issues and lay of the land's different. The messaging's different. The opponents are different. And so it's still, and then how, as we've been talking about today, how we get the message out through digital and video and TV and mail is ever changing. So I still have a lot of fun doing it even after all these years. So, we'll probably be in about 15 states. We'll be in a few governor's races as well, and trying to, hopefully keep some of the Democratic momentum going.
Cool.
That's great. For folks who might want to check out some of your work, what's your website?
Sure. CounterPointMessaging.com.
Perfect. John, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Hope you feel better soon.
Thanks a million, and may the force be with everybody.
Thanks again, John. We'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was fun. I had a really good conversation. I like these podcasts when I get to learn things too. So it's informational and fun. Yeah,
it was great. A little knowledge from Nashville, Tennessee. John Rowley joining us today from CounterPoint Messaging. Long-time experienced hand in developing great video that persuades voters and, ultimately wins your race. That's what we're trying to do. So we got some really great advice, I think, from him on how to do some of this. If your budget doesn't necessarily allow to hire a big firm, it's good stuff.
Yeah. And you know what I think we should do is we should have kind of a follow-up podcast that focuses on digital advertising specifically.
Yeah.
To just kind of dive deeper into that subject, since that's clearly where advertising is going.
Right. How do you build an audience? How do you advertise? What's your universe? How much should you put in? How early? I think all of those things would be really helpful for folks out there.
Cool.
I totally agree with you. I think that would be a fantastic episode, trying to figure out where to do the buy and how often, and how to build an audience and what sort of follow-up you want to do. Facebook's got this little pixel thing that they're instituting. That's a really cool feature to track people who might go to your website as a result of clicking and may not do an action that you want them to, that you can follow up with. It's pretty cool stuff to drill down on. So I agree with you. I think we should do definitely a follow-up on digital advertising. So
sweet.
Well, what did you folks think of the podcast today? We'd love to hear from you. As always, our email is podcast@electionu.com. And if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to jump over to iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Spotify. We're now on Spotify.
Woo!
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. They approved us for some reason.
Amazing. Thank you, Spotify.
I hear that they're pretty selective about who they decide to approve on their podcast. So
look at us.
I know. We're fancy schmancy. However you listen to us, we would love it if you gave us a review and some ratings. That they really help us along. And any feedback that you provide allows us to give better service to our listeners. So we love them, and we definitely will respond. So until next week, I'm Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.